Mom-to-be feels strange kicks. What doctors found made headlines. What do they find? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The quaint town of Willowdale rarely made the news. Nestled between rolling hills and dotted with Victorian-style homes, its charm lay in its unremarkable predictability. That was until Rachel Whitman, a cheerful 28-year-old schoolteacher, became the center of a mystery that would captivate the nation. Rachel had always dreamed of being a mother. When she and her husband, Mark, discovered they were expecting their first child, it felt like the culmination of years of love and planning. The couple's journey to parenthood, however, had been anything but smooth. After 3 miscarriages and countless doctor visits, this pregnancy seemed almost miraculous. But from the start, it wasn't like the others. At first, Rachel chalked up her fatigue and strange cravings to the usual side effects of pregnancy. But by her second trimester, things began to feel different. The kicks started earlier than expected. Sharp, distinct movements that made her gasp. "It's like they're having a dance party in there," Rachel laughed one evening as she described it to Mark. But as weeks went on, the movements grew more pronounced and erratic. At her 20-week ultrasound, the technician furrowed their brow. "Everything looks okay," they said cautiously, their voice betraying a note of hesitation. "But I want to send these scans to a specialist, just to be sure." Rachel's heart sank. Mark tried to reassure her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A week later, the couple found themselves in the sterile office of Dr. Evelyn Carr, a renowned obstetrician specializing in high-risk pregnancies. With her no-nonsense demeanor and sharp features, Dr. Carr didn't sugarcoat her words. "The ultrasound shows some unusual activity. The baby's movements are atypical. It could be nothing, but we'll need further tests." Rachel nodded, clutching Mark's hand tightly. The tests revealed more questions than answers. The baby's heartbeat was strong, but the level of activity was unprecedented. At times, it seemed like there was more than one baby, though every scan confirmed she was carrying just one. As the weeks passed, Rachel's pregnancy became the talk of the town. Her students, oblivious to her worries, showered her with handmade cards and endless questions. Her best friend, Lisa, a spirited woman with a penchant for drama, insisted on throwing a massive baby shower despite Rachel's protests. "Come on, Rach," Lisa exclaimed one afternoon as they browsed through baby clothes at the local boutique. "This is your moment. Embrace it." Rachel smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. The movements were now accompanied by sharp pains that left her breathless. And then there were the dreams. Vivid, unsettling visions of a child with eyes that seemed too wise for its age, staring at her with an intensity that made her shiver. One evening, as she lay in bed, Rachel felt a particularly sharp jab. Gritting her teeth, she placed her hand on her belly. To her horror, she felt what seemed like a second, smaller movement. "Mark," she whispered urgently, "feel this." Mark placed his hand where hers had been. His eyes widened as he felt the distinct, rhythmic thuds. "Are you sure there's just one in there?" he asked, half joking. The next morning, they rushed to Dr. Carr. This time, the ultrasound revealed something shocking. What appeared to be a second, faint shadow flickered on the screen. "Could it be a twin we missed?" Mark asked. Dr. Carr shook her head. "It's unlikely. But I've never seen anything like this before. I'm bringing in a specialist from New York. We need more advanced imaging." As Rachel's pregnancy progressed, the tension in her life reached a boiling point. Lisa, ever the drama queen, insisted something supernatural was at play. "Maybe it's an alien baby," she joked one night over dinner, earning a glare from Mark. Meanwhile, Rachel's estranged mother, Diana, who had been absent for most of her adult life, reappeared out of the blue. "I heard you're going through something unusual," Diana said, her voice filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. Rachel wasn't sure whether to welcome her mother's sudden interest or question her motives. The tension between them simmered, adding another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. At 28 weeks, Rachel's condition took a turn for the worse. She was admitted to Willowdale General Hospital after experiencing severe abdominal pain. The hospital's maternity ward, usually a quiet and comforting place, buzzed with activity as doctors and nurses scrambled to understand what was happening. Dr. Carr, looking more frazzled than Rachel had ever seen her, delivered the news. Rachel, your baby is healthy, but there's something unusual about their development. The advanced imaging has revealed a second heartbeat, but it's not consistent. We're not sure what we're dealing with. The media caught wind of Rachel's mysterious pregnancy, and soon reporters camped outside the hospital. Headlines like, "Mystery Baby, the Unexplainable Kicks," and "A Miracle or a Medical Marvel" dominated the news. Inside the hospital, tensions boiled over. Diana's presence sparked arguments with Mark, who accused her of causing Rachel unnecessary stress. Lisa, ever the dramatist, tried to mediate but only added to the chaos. Amidst it all, Rachel felt isolated. The strange movements now consumed her every waking moment, and the pain was becoming unbearable. One night, as she lay in her hospital bed, she felt a sudden violent kick that left her gasping for air. "Something's wrong," she whispered, pressing the call button frantically. Nurses rushed in, followed closely by Dr. Carr. The monitors beeped erratically as Rachel clutched her belly, tears streaming down her face. "Prep her for an emergency C-section," Dr. Carr ordered. The operating room was a flurry of activity as Rachel was wheeled in. Bright lights glared down at her, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. Mark was by her side, his face pale but determined as he squeezed her hand. Dr. Carr moved swiftly, her usually composed demeanor replaced by an urgent focus. "Rachel," Dr. Carr said calmly, though her eyes betrayed her concern, "we're going to take care of you and your baby. Just breathe." The anesthesia began to take effect, and Rachel's mind drifted into a haze. She could still feel the pressure, hear the muffled voices of the medical team as they worked. Time seemed to slow, each second dragging on like an eternity. And then came the sound that silenced the room, a cry, piercing and loud. Relief swept through Rachel as tears welled in her eyes. Her baby was here, alive and healthy. But before she could fully process the joy, another sound filled the room. A second cry. "Doctor," one of the nurses stammered, her voice tinged with disbelief. There's another one." The team moved quickly, and within moments, a second baby was delivered. The room fell into an eerie silence as the doctors and nurses stared at the two newborns. One was perfectly pink and wailing loudly, while the other was smaller, eerily quiet, and bore a deep red mark spiraling across its chest. "What is that?" a nurse whispered. Dr. Carr didn't answer immediately. She examined the smaller baby closely, her brows knitting together in concentration. Rachel, barely conscious, turned her head weakly. "What's happening?" she murmured, her voice slurred. Mark was speechless, his eyes darting between the two babies. "Twins? How?" Dr. Carr interrupted, her voice steady but firm. "We'll need to run tests immediately. Both babies are stable, but the smaller one, there's something unusual about them." Rachel was moved to recovery, but the tension in the hospital was palpable. The larger twin, a girl they named Mia, was healthy and thriving. The smaller twin, however, puzzled the medical staff. Rachel and Mark decided to name him Eli. Eli's red mark wasn't the only anomaly. His vitals fluctuated wildly, and his movements were erratic. At times, he seemed almost too strong for his tiny frame, gripping the doctor's fingers with a force that startled them. And then there was his gaze, unwavering, intense, almost knowing. The hospital became a circus as news of the mystery twins spread. Reporters camped outside, and conspiracy theories ran rampant. Some claimed the twins were the result of experimental medicine, while others whispered about supernatural phenomena. Inside the hospital, the drama continued to unfold. Diana clashed with Mark over every decision, insisting that Eli needed to be taken to a specialist in another city. "You can't keep him here," Diana argued, her voice rising. "This hospital isn't equipped for something like this." Mark fired back, his patience wearing thin. "And what do you know about being a parent? You walked out on Rachel when she was a kid." Rachel, still recovering, tried to mediate but ended up in tears. Lisa, true to form, added fuel to the fire with her wild theories. Have you considered that this could be, I don't know, paranormal? She whispered to Rachel one night, her eyes wide. That mark on Eli, it looks like something out of a horror movie. Despite the chaos, Rachel felt an unshakable bond with both of her children. Mia was her sunshine, always calm and cheerful. Eli, though more challenging, had a presence that she couldn't ignore. She often found herself staring into his eyes, feeling as though he was trying to tell her something. By the time the twins were 3 months old, the tests on Eli had revealed nothing definitive. Dr. Carr was baffled. Physically, he's healthy, but there are anomalies we can't explain. His muscle strength, his rapid development. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. The strain began to take its toll on Rachel and Mark's marriage. Mark threw himself into work, leaving Rachel to handle the twins and the constant media attention. Diana, despite her overbearing nature, moved in to help, which only added to the tension. One evening, as Rachel sat rocking Eli in the nursery, she felt a sudden chill. The room was quiet except for the soft creak of the rocking chair, but something felt off. Eli's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, she swore she heard a whisper, not in the room, but in her mind. "Protect me!" Rachel froze, her heart pounding. She glanced around the room, but it was empty. Shaking her head, she chalked it up to exhaustion, but the incident left her unnerved. As the months went on, more strange occurrences began to unfold. Objects would fall off shelves for no apparent reason. The twins' room would sometimes be inexplicably cold, even in the middle of summer. And then there were the dreams. Rachel's vivid, haunting dreams of a shadowy figure reaching for Eli. Dr. Carr remained a steadfast presence, visiting the family regularly and conducting further tests. "Rachel," she said one afternoon, "I don't want to alarm you, but there are genetic markers in Eli's DNA that we can't identify. It's as if he has something extra." "Extra?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Carr hesitated. "I don't know how else to describe it. It's not harmful, at least not that we can tell, but it's unprecedented." The revelation left Rachel reeling. As much as she tried to focus on the joy of raising her twins, the weight of the mystery surrounding Eli grew heavier each day. And then, one fateful night, everything changed. It was a stormy evening, the kind that seemed to breathe unease into the very walls of the house. Rain lashed against the windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. Rachel sat in the living room with Mia in her arms, her gaze flicking anxiously toward the baby monitor. Eli had been unusually quiet all day, which only amplified her growing apprehension. Mark was late again. He had called earlier, mumbling something about an important meeting. Rachel didn't press him. She was too exhausted to argue. Diana, who had been staying with them for weeks, was upstairs, likely asleep, leaving Rachel alone with her swirling thoughts and the unnerving silence of the house. The first sound was faint, a soft thud coming from the twins' room. Rachel tensed, her grip on Mia tightening. She glanced at the baby monitor. The grainy screen showed Eli lying in his crib, but something seemed off. She set Mia down gently in her bassinet and made her way upstairs, her heart pounding with each step. The hallway was dimly lit, the shadows cast by the storm outside dancing on the walls. When she reached the nursery, she hesitated before pushing the door open. Eli was sitting up in his crib, his small frame illuminated by a flicker of lightning outside the window. His eyes were fixed on the mobile above his crib, which was spinning slowly despite the fact that there was no breeze. "Eli," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. The mobile stopped abruptly, and Eli turned to look at her. His gaze was unsettlingly intense for a baby his age. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Before she could move, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. Rachel spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. She rushed back down, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it Mark? An intruder? When she reached the living room, she found the coffee table overturned, Mia's bassinet empty. Panic surged through her as she called out, "Mia! Diana!" A muffled cry drew her attention to the kitchen. She ran in to find Diana crouched on the floor, clutching Mia protectively. The kitchen lights flickered, and the air felt thick, almost electric. "What happened?" Rachel demanded, her voice shaking. Diana looked up, her face pale. Something pushed me," she whispered. "I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human." Rachel's breath hitched. She grabbed Mia from Diana and held her close, her mind racing. The strange occurrences, the unexplained phenomena, it was all coming to a head. They barely had time to process what had happened before the lights went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. Rachel fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. "We need to leave," Diana said firmly, her voice trembling. "Now!" Rachel nodded, her instincts screaming at her to protect her children. She handed Mia back to Diana and ran upstairs to get Eli. But when she entered the nursery, her blood ran cold. Eli was no longer in his crib. The room was eerily quiet, the faint sound of rain the only noise breaking the silence. She searched frantically, calling his name even though she knew he couldn't respond. And then she saw it, a shadow moving across the wall, independent of any light source. It darted toward the corner of the room, where Eli sat on the floor, staring up at something Rachel couldn't see. "Eli!" she cried, rushing to scoop him up. The shadow vanished the moment she touched him, but the air remained heavy, oppressive. She clutched him tightly and bolted downstairs, where Diana was waiting with Mia. "We need to go," Rachel said, her voice firm. As they hurried out into the storm, Mark's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, his expression a mix of confusion and concern as he saw them rushing toward him. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rain. "There's no time to explain," Rachel said, shoving Eli into his arms. "Just get in the car, now." The family piled into the car, and Mark didn't hesitate to drive away, his questions drowned out by the tension radiating from Rachel. She kept glancing back at the twins, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. As the storm raged on outside, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow along the roadside, every flicker of lightning seemed to hide something sinister. When they finally reached Diana's suggestion, a small motel on the outskirts of town, Rachel collapsed onto the bed, holding both of her children close. Mark and Diana exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. That night, Rachel dreamed again. The shadowy figure returned, this time clearer, more defined. It stood over Eli's crib, its features obscured but its intent unmistakable. "Protect him," the voice whispered again, echoing in her mind. Rachel woke with a start, her heart racing. She looked over at Eli, who was sleeping peacefully in the motel crib. She knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Whatever was happening to her family, whatever was happening to Eli, was only beginning. The next morning, the storm had passed, but a heavy sense of unease lingered in the air. Rachel sat at the small motel table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee while Mia and Eli slept in their portable cribs. Mark paced the room, his face drawn and tense. Diana leaned against the wall, her arms crossed as she watched the twins with an unreadable expression. "We can't stay here," Mark said finally, breaking the silence. "Whatever happened last night, it's not normal. We need help. Real help." Diana scoffed. "You think some regular doctor can explain what's going on? Open your eyes, Mark. This is beyond science." Mark whirled on her, his patience snapping. "And what do you suggest? A psychic? A seance? Maybe we should call the tabloids while we're at it." "Stop it," Rachel's voice cut through the argument like a blade. Both Mark and Diana turned to her, startled. She stood, her hands trembling but her gaze steady. "Fighting isn't going to solve anything. We need to figure this out. Together." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, but where do we even start?" Rachel hesitated, her mind racing. Dr. Carr had been their anchor throughout the pregnancy and had seen Eli's anomalies firsthand. She decided they needed her expertise now more than ever. "We go back to Dr. Carr," Rachel said firmly. "She's the only one who might have answers." Mark nodded reluctantly, and Diana didn't object. Within an hour, they were back on the road, heading toward Willowdale. The drive was tense, the silence broken only by the occasional fussing from the back seat. Rachel kept glancing at Eli, who was unusually calm, his dark eyes gazing out the window as though he understood everything that was happening. When they arrived at the hospital, Dr. Carr greeted them with a mixture of relief and concern. "I've been trying to reach you," she said as they settled into her office. "I got the results from Eli's latest tests. There's something unexplainable." Rachel leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Dr. Carr handed her a folder. Inside were images and charts, most of which Rachel didn't understand. But one scan caught her attention. A strange, spiraling pattern embedded in Eli's DNA sequence. "This shouldn't exist," Dr. Carr said quietly. "It's a genetic marker, but it doesn't match anything in human biology. It's almost as if—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "As if it was introduced from an external source." Mark frowned. "What are you saying? That Eli isn't human?" Dr. Carr shook her head. "He's human, but there's something more. Something we don't understand. And the mark on his chest, it corresponds to this sequence. It's not just a birthmark, it's connected." Rachel felt a chill run through her. The shadowy figure from her dreams, the voice whispering, "Protect him?" Was it all tied to this? Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. A man in a dark suit stepped into the office, his expression cold and authoritative. "Dr. Carr," he said, flashing a badge. "I'm Agent Roberts with the Department of Scientific Anomalies. We need to talk about your patient." Rachel's blood ran cold. "What is this?" she demanded, clutching Eli protectively. The agent's gaze shifted to her, unflinching. "We've been monitoring unusual genetic anomalies. Your son's case flagged our system. We need to take him in for further study." "Absolutely not," Rachel snapped, rising to her feet. "You're not taking my son anywhere." Agent Roberts didn't flinch. "Mrs. Whitman, this isn't a request. Eli represents a potential breakthrough in genetic research. We're not here to harm him. We're here to understand him." Mark stepped in front of Rachel, his jaw tight. "You're not taking our son." The tension in the room was palpable. Diana, surprisingly calm, spoke up. "You're making a mistake, Agent. If you think you can just waltz in and take a child, you're going to have a fight on your hands." The agent raised an eyebrow. "We have jurisdiction in cases like this." Dr. Carr, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Agent Roberts, with all due respect, this is a medical matter. Eli is my patient, and I won't allow him to be taken without a court order." Roberts narrowed his eyes but didn't argue. "You have 48 hours to cooperate," he said, his tone icy. "After that, we'll take the necessary steps." He left as abruptly as he'd arrived, leaving the room in stunned silence. Rachel sank into her chair, her mind racing. "What do we do now?" she whispered. "We run," Diana said without hesitation. "If they take Eli, we'll never see him again." Mark hesitated, clearly torn. "And go where?" "They'll find us." Rachel looked at Eli, who stared back at her with those unnervingly wise eyes. She felt a surge of determination. "We'll figure it out, but we're not letting them take him." Dr. Carr nodded. "I'll help however I can, but you need to leave. Tonight." The family quickly packed what little they had and slipped out a back entrance of the hospital. They didn't know where they were going or how they would evade the government, but one thing was clear. They had to protect Eli, no matter the cost. As they drove into the night, the weight of their decisions settled over them. They were no longer just parents. They were fugitives. And the mystery of Eli's existence was only deepening. The road stretched endlessly before them, the glow of the headlights carving a narrow path through the darkness. Rachel clutched Eli tightly to her chest, her heart pounding as she kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see flashing lights in pursuit. In the back seat, Diana cradled Mia, her face etched with a rare look of seriousness, while Mark gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "Where are we even going?" Mark finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. Rachel hesitated, her mind racing. They had no plan, no destination. All she knew was that they needed to keep moving, to stay ahead of the shadowy agents who wanted her son. Head toward Greenville, Diana suggested, her voice surprisingly calm. I have a friend there, someone who can help. Mark shot her a skeptical glance in the rearview mirror. A friend? You mean one of your old spiritual buddies? We don't need crystals and chants right now, Diana. Rachel cut him off before an argument could erupt. If Diana knows someone who might help, we don't have a better option. Let's just go. Mark grumbled under his breath but didn't argue further, steering the car toward the highway that led out of Willowdale. As the minutes stretched into hours, the tension in the car grew heavier. Rachel tried to focus on Eli, who was awake and unusually quiet, his dark eyes fixed on her face. She felt a strange sense of calm radiating from him, as though he understood everything that was happening. Finally, just as dawn began to break, they arrived in Greenville. The small, sleepy town was a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. Diana directed them to a modest house at the edge of town, surrounded by dense woods. The house was weathered but welcoming, with a small garden blooming out front. Diana knocked on the door, and after a few tense moments, it creaked open to reveal a woman in her 60s with piercing blue eyes and a serene demeanor. She was wrapped in a flowing shawl and carried herself with an air of quiet authority. Diana, the woman said, a hint of surprise in her voice. It's been a long time. It has, Diana replied, stepping aside to let Rachel and Mark approach. This is my daughter Rachel and her husband, Mark. We need your help, Sophia. Sophia's gaze shifted to Eli, and her expression softened. Come in, quickly. The family entered the cozy home, the scent of herbs and burning sage filling the air. Sophia wasted no time, motioning for them to sit around a large wooden table in the center of the room. Diana has told me some of what's happening, Sophia began, her voice calm but firm. Your son is special, Rachel. I could feel it the moment I saw him. Rachel clutched Eli protectively. Special how? What does that even mean? Sophia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. There are energies in this world, forces beyond what science can explain. Your son carries a connection to something ancient, something powerful. The mark on his chest is a sign of that connection. Mark groaned, leaning back in his chair. Great. More cryptic nonsense. Can you just tell us what's wrong with him? Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained steady. There's nothing wrong with him, but there are those who will see his uniqueness as a threat, or as something to exploit. That's why you're being pursued. Rachel's stomach churned. Do you know how we can protect him? Sophia stood and walked to a shelf filled with old books and artifacts. She retrieved a leather-bound tome and flipped through its pages until she found what she was looking for. She placed the book on the table, pointing to an illustration of a spiral mark identical to the one on Eli's chest. This symbol, Sophia explained, has appeared throughout history, always linked to individuals who possess extraordinary abilities. They've been called many things, prophets, healers, saviors, but they've always been targets too. Rachel stared at the image, her hands trembling. So you're saying Eli has some kind of power? Sophia nodded. He might, but he's just a baby now. Whatever potential he has will take time to manifest. The important thing is keeping him safe until then. Mark leaned forward, his skepticism giving way to determination. How do we do that? How do we stop these people from finding us? Sophia closed the book and met his gaze. You can't run forever, but there are places, sanctuaries, where those like Eli can be protected. I can help you find one, but it won't be easy. Before Rachel could respond, a loud knock echoed through the house. Everyone froze, their eyes darting toward the door. Did anyone follow you here? Sophia asked in a whisper. No, Mark said, his voice low. We were careful. The knock came again, more forceful this time. Rachel's heart raced as she clutched Eli tighter. Sophia motioned for everyone to stay quiet, then moved to the door. She peered through the peephole before opening it a crack. To Rachel's relief, it wasn't Agent Roberts or any government official. Instead, it was a young man with disheveled hair and a panicked expression. He looked familiar, though Rachel couldn't immediately place him. Sophia, the man gasped. They're coming. You need to get them out of here, now. Sophia's face darkened. She turned back to Rachel and Mark. You need to leave. There's a safe house about an hour from here. I'll give you directions. Mark stood, already preparing to grab their bags. Who is this guy? He asked, nodding toward the stranger. Someone who's been through this before, Sophia replied cryptically. Now go. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Rachel hesitated, her instincts screaming to stay and demand answers, but the urgency in Sophia's voice left no room for argument. Cradling Eli, she followed Mark and Diana out the back door, their escape once again shrouded in uncertainty. As they disappeared into the woods, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much larger and much more dangerous. The woods seemed alive with whispers as the family moved through the dense foliage. Branches snagged on Rachel's clothes, and the damp earth squelched beneath their hurried steps. Eli rested quietly against her chest, his small body warm and oddly comforting amidst the chaos. Mark led the way with Diana close behind, holding Mia securely. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves set Rachel's nerves on edge, her eyes darting toward the shadows that loomed around them. Mark glanced back, his voice low but urgent. Sophia said it's about an hour's walk. We need to keep moving. Rachel nodded, though her legs already felt like lead. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was beginning to wane, replaced by an overwhelming exhaustion. Still, she pushed forward, driven by the primal need to protect her children. Diana, surprisingly steady, broke the tense silence. Sophia wouldn't send us off without a plan. She'll buy us time. Mark didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. Rachel could tell he wasn't convinced. As they moved deeper into the woods, the faint glow of dawn began to filter through the canopy. The light should have brought relief, but instead, it cast eerie shadows that danced in their peripheral vision. Are we sure we're alone out here? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark paused, scanning the trees around them. Let's hope so. The silence that followed was suffocating. Suddenly, Eli stirred in Rachel's arms, letting out a soft, almost melodic coo. Rachel froze, her eyes locking onto his face. His gaze was fixed upward, and she followed it to see nothing. Just branches swaying gently in the wind. What is it? Mark asked, noticing her hesitation. Nothing, Rachel lied, though a chill ran down her spine. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, they came upon a clearing where a small cabin sat nestled among the trees. It was weathered but sturdy, with ivy creeping up the walls and a stone chimney that hinted at a long-abandoned fireplace. This must be it, Diana said, her voice filled with cautious relief. Mark approached the door, his hand hovering over the latch. He hesitated, glancing back at Rachel. Stay back, just in case. Rachel nodded, clutching Eli tightly as Mark pushed the door open. The inside was sparse but functional, with a single room containing a cot, a table, and a few chairs. A wood-burning stove sat in one corner, and a stack of canned goods was neatly arranged on a shelf. It's empty, Mark called, motioning for them to come in. As they settled into the cabin, Rachel felt the first flicker of safety since their flight began. She placed Eli on the cot next to Mia, who was already dozing peacefully. Diana rummaged through the shelves, finding a lantern and a few supplies. We can rest here for a bit, Mark said, though his tone was uncertain. But we need to figure out what's next. Rachel nodded, sinking into one of the chairs. Her body ached, and her mind was a whirlwind of fear and unanswered questions. I don't know how much more of this I can take, she admitted, her voice breaking. Eli, he's just a baby. Why is this happening to us? Diana sat across from her, her expression unusually soft. Because he's not just a baby, Rachel. You've seen it, felt it. There's something extraordinary about him. Mark exhaled sharply. We don't even know what that means. We're running blind, and every time we think we're safe, something else happens. Before anyone could respond, Eli began to cry. A sharp, piercing wail that sent shivers down Rachel's spine. She rushed to his side, scooping him up and rocking him gently. Shh. It's okay, baby, it's okay, she murmured. But Eli's cries didn't stop, They grew louder, more insistent, as if he was trying to communicate something. And then the temperature in the room dropped. Rachel froze, her breath visible in the sudden chill. The lantern flickered, and a low, rumbling sound echoed from somewhere outside the cabin. "What was that?" Diana whispered, her eyes wide. Mark grabbed a fire poker from the stove, his grip tightening as he moved toward the door. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." "Mark, no!" Rachel hissed, clutching Eli tighter. "I'll be fine," he said firmly, stepping out into the clearing. Rachel locked the door as instructed, her heart racing. She moved to the window, peeking out to see Mark circling the cabin, his eyes scanning the woods. And then she saw it. A shadow, darker than the night, moving between the trees. It wasn't the figure from her dreams, but it was enough to send her heart into overdrive. "Mark!" she shouted, banging on the window. He turned just in time to see the shadow lunge at him. Rachel screamed as he swung the fire poker, connecting with something that let out an unearthly screech. The shadow dissipated, but the chill in the air remained. Mark stumbled back into the cabin, slamming the door behind him. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he dropped the fire poker. "What was that?" Rachel demanded, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not over." As if in response, Eli's cries stopped abruptly. Rachel looked down at him, her heart skipping a beat. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, she felt a strange sense of calm. "Protect me," the familiar whisper echoed in her mind. Rachel's breath hitched. She didn't know what was coming, but one thing was clear. Eli wasn't just a baby, and whatever force was after him wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted. The eerie stillness in the cabin after Mark's return was suffocating. Rachel could feel the air grow heavier, as if the presence that had attacked her husband was still watching, waiting just beyond the shadows of the woods. Mark sat by the door, gripping the fire poker like a lifeline, while Diana began muttering under her breath, her eyes closed in a kind of meditative trance. "What are you doing?" Mark asked, his voice sharp, but Rachel caught the undertone of desperation. "Trying to see if there's anything else nearby," Diana replied, her tone surprisingly calm. "Sophia taught me a thing or two about energy tracking. If that thing is still out there, I want to know." Mark scoffed, but Rachel cut him off with a glare. "Let her try. We don't have the luxury of skepticism anymore." Eli shifted in Rachel's arms, his tiny fingers curling around her shirt. His eyes, though drowsy, seemed unusually alert, as if he understood every word being spoken. Rachel stroked his head, feeling the faint warmth of his skin against the growing chill in the cabin. "Do you think it'll come back?" Rachel asked Mark, though she wasn't sure she wanted an answer. Mark tightened his grip on the poker. "I don't think it ever left." The lantern flickered again, and the temperature dropped further. Diana's eyes snapped open, her expression grim. "It's still here." "What?" Rachel gasped, clutching Eli closer. "It's not in the woods anymore. It's close. Too close." The words barely left her mouth when the faint sound of scratching came from the roof. Rachel's blood ran cold. Mark jumped to his feet, holding the poker like a weapon, his eyes darting toward the ceiling. "Stay back," he said, motioning for Rachel and Diana to move to the corner of the room. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was outside was searching for a way in. Rachel's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to protect her children, but how could she fight something she couldn't even see? Then Eli did something that stopped her heart. He reached out a tiny hand toward the ceiling, his lips parting as if he was trying to speak. A soft, melodic hum escaped him, a sound far too mature and deliberate for a baby his age. "Eli?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. The scratching stopped. The cabin fell into a deafening silence, broken only by the crackle of the lantern's flame. Mark looked back at Rachel, his face a mixture of fear and confusion. "What the hell was that?" he asked. Before anyone could answer, a loud bang reverberated through the cabin, shaking the walls. The door rattled on its hinges, and the chill in the air became almost unbearable. Rachel pressed herself against the wall, shielding Eli as the banging continued, each strike more forceful than the last. We need to get out of here, Diana shouted, grabbing Mia from the cot. Where are we supposed to go? Mark yelled back. We're in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, the door burst open, splinters flying as an invisible force surged into the cabin. The lantern's flame was snuffed out, plunging them into darkness. Rachel screamed, holding Eli tightly as a cold wind whipped through the room. And then, a voice, not a whisper, but a deep, resonant voice, filled the air. It wasn't speaking in any language Rachel recognized, but the tone was commanding, almost reverent. The sound seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Eli began to glow faintly, a soft golden light radiating from his small body. The red spiral on his chest shimmered, pulsing in time with the strange voice. Rachel's fear gave way to awe as she watched her son, his expression calm and serene despite the chaos around him. "What's happening?" Mark shouted, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I don't know," Rachel cried, tears streaming down her face. "But he's doing something." The golden light grew brighter, filling the cabin and forcing the shadows back. The cold dissipated, replaced by a comforting warmth. The strange voice faltered, as if whatever had invaded the cabin was retreating. Then, as quickly as it began, everything stopped. The wind died, the light faded, and the oppressive presence was gone. The cabin was silent once more, save for the labored breathing of its occupants. Rachel collapsed onto the floor, clutching Eli to her chest. He was sleeping peacefully, his glow completely gone. She kissed his forehead, her tears soaking into his soft skin. "What was that?" Mark asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't know," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he protected us." Diana knelt beside them, her expression a mix of fear and wonder. Sophia was right. He's connected to something far greater than us. Rachel looked down at her son, her heart swelling with a fierce protectiveness. Whatever Eli was, whatever power he possessed, he was still her baby, and she would do whatever it took to keep him safe. "We can't stay here," Rachel said, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "We need to find that sanctuary Sophia mentioned. Somewhere no one, and nothing, can find us." Mark nodded, his skepticism replaced by determination. "Then we move at first light, but we can't do this alone. We need help." Rachel looked at Diana, who gave a small nod. "Sophia has more connections. We'll find a way." As the family huddled together, the weight of what they had just experienced settled over them. The road ahead was uncertain, and the dangers were far from over. But for the first time, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope. Eli was special, and whatever his destiny was, she would stand by his side every step of the way. The next morning came swiftly, sunlight filtering through the broken door of the cabin and illuminating the room where the family had huddled for warmth and safety. Despite the horrors of the night, Rachel woke feeling oddly rejuvenated, as if Eli's mysterious light had washed away her exhaustion. She glanced at her son, who was still sleeping soundly in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful rhythm. The red spiral on his skin was faint now, almost invisible, as though it had retreated after the events of the previous night. Mark, already awake, stood near the door, repairing the broken hinges with a roll of duct tape he'd found on a shelf. He gave Rachel a small, tired smile. "We'll need to move soon." "I know," Rachel replied, her voice soft. "Where do we go from here?" "Sophia mentioned sanctuaries," Diana said, breaking the silence as she fed Mia a bottle of formula. "She wasn't just talking about safe houses. There are people out there, others like Eli, or at least people who understand his kind of power." Mark shot her a skeptical glance but didn't argue this time. The events of the night had stripped him of doubt. "Do you know where these sanctuaries are?" "I don't," Diana admitted. "But I know someone who might." Rachel frowned. "Another friend of yours?" "Not exactly a friend," Diana said with a wry smile. "But someone who owes me a favor. He's in Salt Creek, about 2 hours from here." Mark nodded. "Then that's where we're headed." The family packed quickly, gathering the few supplies they had and bundling the children tightly against the morning chill. Mark drove in tense silence, his eyes scanning the road for signs of pursuit. Rachel sat in the back with the twins, her hand resting protectively on Eli's chest. As they approached Salt Creek, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. She glanced out the rear window, her heart racing every time a car appeared in the distance. But each time, the vehicle eventually turned off or disappeared, leaving her unsure if her fears were justified or simply paranoia. Salt Creek was even smaller than Willowdale, with a main street lined by a few shops and a gas station. Diana directed them to a weathered building on the outskirts of town, its faded sign identifying it as the Iron Raven. It looked more like a biker bar than a place where answers might be found. "Here?" Mark asked, incredulous. "Trust me," Diana said, climbing out of the car. Inside, the bar was dimly lit, its walls lined with photographs, old maps, and strange artifacts. A man stood behind the counter, polishing a glass. He was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and a face that spoke of a hard-lived life. His sharp eyes narrowed as Diana approached. "Well, if it isn't Diana Whitman," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Haven't seen you in years." "Hello, Garrett," Diana replied. "I need your help." Garrett's gaze shifted to Rachel, Mark, and the twins. His expression darkened when he saw Eli, and he set the glass down slowly. "You've brought trouble, haven't you?" "Not trouble," Diana said quickly. "A child who needs protection." Garrett's eyes lingered on the faint spiral mark on Eli's chest, and he let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. You don't see that every day." "You know what it means?" Rachel asked, stepping forward. "I know enough," Garrett replied. "Kids like him are rare. Very rare. They're born with a connection to, let's call it the old power. The kind of energy the world used to be built on before we forgot how to use it." "Why is everyone after him?" Mark asked. "What do they want?" "Control," Garrett said bluntly. "If you can harness that kind of power, you can reshape reality. Governments, corporations, they'd kill to get their hands on him. But it's not just them you need to worry about." Rachel's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" "There are other forces out there," Garrett said, his voice dropping. "Not human, not exactly friendly. They'd see a child like him as a threat, or worse, a tool." Mark slammed his fist on the counter. "Then where can we go? How do we keep him safe?" Garrett studied them for a long moment before nodding. "There's a place, a sanctuary hidden deep in the Rockies. Only a handful of people know about it. They'll protect the boy, and teach him to protect himself when the time comes." "Where is it?" Rachel asked, desperation coloring her voice. Garrett scribbled a set of coordinates on a napkin. "It's a long way from here, and the journey won't be easy. But if you can get there, they'll take you in." Rachel took the napkin, clutching it like a lifeline. "Thank you." Garrett nodded. "One more thing," he said, his tone grave. "Once you're there, don't leave. Not for anything." The journey to the sanctuary was grueling. They drove through endless stretches of highway, slept in cheap motels, and navigated treacherous mountain roads. All the while, they felt the weight of unseen eyes watching them, the constant fear of being caught. When they finally arrived, the sanctuary was everything Garrett had promised. A hidden haven nestled in a lush valley, surrounded by towering peaks. The people there welcomed them without question, their eyes filled with the kind of understanding that came from living with secrets of their own. For the first time in months, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope. Eli would be safe here. He would have a chance to grow, to learn, to become whatever he was meant to be. As she stood on the balcony of their new home, watching the sun dip below the mountains, Rachel held Eli close and whispered, "I don't know what the future holds, but I'll be with you every step of the way." And in her arms, Eli stirred, his tiny hand clutching hers with a strength that belied his age, a silent promise of his own.